Good morning. My name is Iyana Simba, and during the day, I work as a city government affairs at the Illinois Environmental Council, which is a nonprofit organization. We represent about 130 environmental orgs across the state of Illinois. We do a lot of work in Springfield, but I'm making sure that we build out our work in Chicago. So I want to share a little bit about myself. So I've been here for 14 years, but I am originally from Michigan. That is my hometown. I didn't go to Michigan State, but I'm just from the city where it's at. I feel like that's the only way people know where Lansing, Michigan is. And these three coal stacks are essentially a landmark in my hometown. And me and my dad, we used to fish in this area. And I remember asking him, why can't we eat the fish? 'Cause we would just catch them, throw them back, catch them, throw them back. And he told me, he's like, well, there's that factory right there. And so that was the first time I ever made the connection between, oh, there's this pollution, it can directly impact my life. And so while we didn't eat out of it, there were a lot of people, especially older, Black, and lower income folks that would eat the fish out of there. And sometimes my dad would kind of joke with them, like, you shouldn't do that. And people would just kind of laugh it off. And for me, that was the first time I also saw a lack of environmental literacy. These are intelligent people, right? These are elders. These aren't people who are not sentient. But there was obviously a gap in environmental education. And so that's what led me into the work that I do now with environmental policy, doing all these amazing and wonderful fun things, including being here today. So I want to talk about environmental racism from a few different perspectives. One, I want to start off with hazardous job occupations. I know oftentimes in Black communities, we are told, this may cause pollution, but it's jobs. We're gonna bring jobs, we're gonna bring jobs. And we never talk about what those jobs actually are and what those risks are posing to our communities and the actual workers there. And I also wanna say, I don't want to demean these jobs. There are people that still work in these industries. And our financial security for many of us is due to our parents, our grandparents working in this. So, my financial security comes from my father being a crane operator, my granddad working at Upjohn as a plant operator. So I don't want to ever demean these jobs, but we do have to recognize the risk. And so historically, Black people, we have been relegated to low-paying, dangerous, unsafe jobs. And when I put dirty in there, I really just mean people are being exposed to chemicals and pollution that most other people want to avoid. So I was just doing some research, and I found this really interesting example. This was in 1931 at the Hawks Nest Tunnel in West Virginia, right? Great Depression, 5,000 workers, mostly Black men, go to the area. They're like, I can make money, send my check back home. Ended up being where 500 people ended up dying because of an exposure to silica content, and about 170 died almost instantly. This was easily preventable. There's techniques such as wet mining that's been around since 1719. They didn't provide breathing apparatuses, and they didn't let the workers know the dangers of, they weren't aware of the dangers of their work. And so people literally died because of intentional negligence. And so moving forward to now, the modern hazardous workplace, right? We still have people that are in those types of jobs, but we also see this rise of e-commerce. I think everybody knows someone who works at Amazon or has worked at Amazon. And we know now with the rise of e-commerce, black workers compose 1/4 of the warehouse and e-commerce workforce. And while we do have an increase in standards, we still have discriminatory practices that remain. So a lot of people end up in these jobs, but we're not breaking the ceiling into mid-management or corporate at Amazon and these other larger corporations. And then just across the board, regardless of industry, Black workers often face a higher prevalence of workplace injuries and work-related disabilities. And finally, now with the rise of AI and automation and jobs continuing to be sent overseas, we are losing some of those manufacturing jobs. Those jobs for a long time in our community were brought, that held together our middle class. So Black people, we've been hit especially hard. Between 1998 and 2020, we lost over 646,000 manufacturing jobs. So there's an opportunity gap. So there is this growing green economy, and it is overwhelmingly white. We are, at the federal and the state level, there are investments being made. So you've probably heard about these in the news recently with the Infrastructure Investment Jobs Act, the Inflation Reduction Act. There is a lot of uncertainty, but a lot of the investment has already been made, and we know that these jobs, we are going to see them over the next decade, and we need to make sure they're prioritized for Black people. And at the state level, we have the Climate and Equitable Jobs Act. It basically puts Illinois on a pathway to 100% renewable energy by 2050. It comes with a lot of different things, part of it being EV charging and infrastructure, but to me what stands out the most is this $82 million per year for workforce development, right? You can't tell people, let's move over to clean energy, let's move over to these things, but we're not gonna provide you a pathway to that. And so 40% of that is going towards the environmental justice and low-income communities. Now, these aren't exactly reparations policies, but these do provide a good blueprint. It's not just about clean energy. We have a water infrastructure that needs to be redone. There are tons of jobs, and we need to figure out a way, speaking to my lawmakers, to make sure it's prioritized to Black people here in Illinois. So I want to pivot and talk about flooding and climate change. I was on the phone with a few organizers a few days ago, and I think it was Ana Garcia Doyle, and she said that flooding is not a nuisance, it is a symptom of climate change. And so while we see wildfires happening in the West, we see hurricanes in the South, Illinois is not gonna be immune, and what we are gonna be seeing is these more intense rainstorms and flooding. And at the same time, we also have this huge divestment in water infrastructure, especially in our communities. And so I just wanted to share a couple of photos to show that flooding really does impact people's lives. So this photo on the left-hand side is a woman on the west side of Chicago. So I don't know if people remember back in July of 2023, it was the NASCAR weekend, the first time they did it, but it was also torrential rains, and people on the west side had their homes destroyed and flooded. This article was from September of 2024. Now the picture, I don't believe it's from 2024, but there were still people waiting for FEMA relief. That's a problem. And then going over to the right-hand side, this is off of, I believe, 67th. Back in 2019 and 2020, we had a lot of, the shoreline was increasing. And this is something that happens, the lake levels go back and forth, but now with climate change, it's increasing in frequency and intensity. And so there was a lot of attention paid to the north side, and and rightfully so, right? There were beaches being swallowed up, but people also forgot and neglected the south side. So while there was investment in infrastructure and rocks and all those things on the north side, this is what was happening on the south side initially. There are people that live on the South Shore in Chicago. There's people that have condos, there's businesses, there's homes, there's beaches in that area, and they deserve the same amount of investment as well. And then, of course, I cannot forget about our rural and suburban brothers and sisters. I don't always want to talk about what's happening in Chicago. We know that there are the Quincy, Illinois, the Robin, Illinois, the Cahokia and Centerville, Illinois in this world. And so this is particularly in the Cahokia Heights, Centerville community. This is on the far southeast, near St. Louis part of the state. And they are dealing with this because of a lack of, basically a failing sewer system. And these issues are being exacerbated by climate change. These are the things that our community faces if we are not having targeted investment in our water infrastructure. And then I want to go to like the last part about brownfields, smog, air quality issues, and cumulative impacts. Slide got a little bit messed up, but basically with brownfields, typically you see things like former gas stations, former industrial plants, and abandoned railroads. And the impact of this, right, is not just, oh, it's unsightly, it doesn't look good. There are actual potential hazards in cases of leaks or spills and even natural disasters. And then it also has an impact on our property value. So now there's a direct economic impact. And then coupling that with air pollution, right? I talked about the rise of e-commerce. These warehouses are popping up around Illinois, and they're popping up in our communities, not only in the city, but also in the suburbs and the rural areas as well. And people may think it's just a warehouse, but you have to think about the diesel trucks that are coming in and out of there. Amazon is electrifying some of their fleets, that's great, but there's still diesel trucks that are bringing those goods to those warehouses. And then again, with the history of redlining, we have polluting industries that are concentrated in our communities. A lot of us live near highways and railroads. And then an inaccessible zoning process. Through my work, I go to a lot of zoning committee meetings and a lot of town halls, and often the community is brought in at the end to have a town hall, get some water bottles and some cookies, and say, what do you think? We're gonna do it anyways. And so that is part of the reason why we have a lot of poor air quality in our community as well, and a lack of trees and green space, and then a lack of public transportation. So we should really be thinking about environmental racism from a cumulative perspective, right? So we have the historical redlining, we have even the current zoning policies that put these industries into our community. At the same time, we have a historic divestment in infrastructure in our communities. And then that leads to things like lower property values, lack of businesses, vacant lots, lack of care for the immediate environment, and even population loss. I talked earlier with some folks about, Chicago and even in Evanston, where Black people are being forced out of our communities. And then finally, there's a health and economic impact, right? So we are facing higher rates of asthma, cancer, heart disease. We have a bunch of lead pipes, so we're exposed to lead poisoning. And then again, with those hazardous jobs, we are more at risk for job injury. So people losing wages, losing income, and then also coupled with the higher healthcare cost. So I never want to talk about things without providing any type of a solution. I think to me, the most important is one, reforming the zoning process to prioritize the needs of Black residents. If you are putting something in a predominantly Black community, those are the people that need to be prioritized. We need to have we need to have targeted workforce development opportunities for the Black community. And then when I was doing a lot of this research, I realized there was a lack of Black specific studies, especially when it comes to environmental pollution. And so we need funding specifically for those studies for Black people. And then targeted buyouts. There are some places where that remediation is not going to happen for decades. There are places where it's going to continue to flood no matter what. People should not be forced to stay in those communities. We should be providing some source of a way out for people, so providing buyouts. So these are just some of the things that could be used as potential solutions that I would definitely pass along to the commission. But with that, I just want to say thank you so much for having me be here. Thank you all for coming out on a Saturday morning. And I'm just very thankful to be here. And if you ever want to contact me, that's my contact information. Thank you.